YouTube has been expanding and releasing some amazing features on the platform. And the most recent one that I noticed yesterday was a podcast tab in the YouTube studio. And this has come at quite an amazing time for me because I've been considering starting and launching a podcast on YouTube for a little while now. So for today's video, we're going to explore this feature a little bit and I'm going to show you how to use it. So we are in the back end of my YouTube studio here. And as you can see, we have videos, we have live posts, playlists, and now a new one, podcast. And if you want to learn a little bit more about the podcast and what everything that you need to do is, you can click this learn more here and it will open up this tab. It'll give you a little bit more information. They have a video, which I recommend that you watch because I learned a lot from the video that they have on there, but I'll summarize it in this video for you. So you can get a little bit of information here and like my take on it. But if you want more information and directly from YouTube, then go ahead and click on that. So YouTube is considering a podcast to be a playlist on YouTube. And this doesn't mean that now all of your playlists are going to be considered as podcasts. You have to create the podcast playlist through this podcast tab in order for it to be considered a podcast. And then podcast episodes are videos within that podcast playlist. And the cool thing is you can add new or existing videos to your podcast playlist, which I think is fantastic. So if you are already doing a podcast on YouTube, you can create a new podcast and then add videos to that podcast playlist. You can also use existing playlists as a podcast if you already have a podcast playlist. So for example, let's say I want to do my Start a YouTube Channel Help podcast or playlist as a podcast. I just go to options and set as a podcast. And now that whole playlist is considered a podcast. And at first I thought these podcasts were going to be audio only, and I was really confused and interested to see how that was going to work on YouTube because obviously YouTube is video, but it seems like these are still going to be videos. So it's essentially just going to be a video podcast as opposed to an audio only podcast, in case anyone was wondering. So I'm going to walk through a little bit about how to create the podcast. Obviously you click on new podcast here, and then it'll ask you, do you want to set an existing one as a podcast or create a new one? Since I am going to be creating a new one, I'm going to click that option, and my podcast is going to be called Embracing Your Power. And I already have a description for it, so let me go ahead and copy and paste that in. I'm gonna set the visibility right now to unlisted just because I'm showing you guys and I'm not releasing the podcast until Monday. So if you're watching this in the future, my podcast is already launched. And then you need to have a podcast thumbnail as well, which I have already created. So I'm gonna go here to the podcast test, put that up there, wait for that to upload, and then we go to create. So obviously if you are launching it right away, you want to launch yours as public, but I'm going to keep mine as unlisted till I get the first episode ready. And the cool thing is about this too is you can have multiple podcasts as well. So if you want to create another podcast, you can do that. You can go in and create another podcast. So now when we go back to podcast, you can see that my Embracing Your Power podcast is here, and we can edit any of the details, which this is all you can do right here. If you want to order your videos in a specific way, you can either do manually sort on YouTube, so you can actually choose where you want your videos to be ordered in. You can do oldest, newest, most popular, or the date that they were published. So it really depends on how your podcast is going to be. If it like you want them to watch it in a certain order. And I think this is my favorite feature here, manually sorted in YouTube, because if you have a bunch of podcast episodes or a bunch of videos you want to be considered as a podcast, you can manually edit them yourself. I think that was really cool. And then we can go here to videos. Obviously, I don't have any videos here. And another good tab here is analytics. So you can actually see the analytics for your podcast specifically in your podcast tab. And these are all pretty much the exact same, the views, the watch time, if you're monetized. This is what I think is amazing too. If you are planning to start a podcast, but you don't know how to use Apple, you don't know how to use Spotify, I don't know how to use those platforms, and I also don't know how to monetize those platforms because I've never done it before. If you are already monetized on YouTube, your podcast will immediately automatically be monetized just like all of your other videos, which is fantastic because now you can keep all of your videos in one place, your podcast, everything, and you can get more revenue from your podcast immediately if you are already monetized. And if you are not already monetized, podcasting might be a great way to get those 4,000 watch hours that you need, because podcasts tend to be 30 minutes to an hour. Of course, they don't have to be, but typically they can be 30 minutes to an hour, and people sit there and like listen to them every morning and they binge watch their podcasts, or they watch them every week. So you can potentially get people to watch your videos for longer, meaning you can get your 4,000 watch hours a lot quicker. And then we can see the content here. Of course, obviously I don't have anything here really because there's no podcast episodes. I guess for now it's just showing my typical intros in general, but I'm wondering if when I start uploading videos, if it will tell me specifically for my podcast. I'm not exactly sure because like this is a brand new feature. And then you can see the same demographics here. And then for me, I have the revenue tab because obviously I am monetized. So how you add videos to this podcast is you can either go to your content and go to videos. I showed you how to add the playlist. Same thing for regular videos. Let's say I want to add this video here. I can just click on it and you should be able to just add it to a playlist. Yes, you can see Embracing Your Power. It tells you that it's your podcast playlist. So I'm going to go ahead and add a few videos to this playlist so I can show you what it's going to look like because I'm interested to see as well. I'm not sure how you can change settings. Edit on YouTube maybe? Oh, okay, maybe this is what I need. So I think if you go to edit on YouTube, yeah, now you can see this. And now if I decide I want this video to be above, now I can do that. So you have to go into your podcast, you have to go to options, and you have to go to edit on YouTube if you want to manually edit where your videos are. Now, obviously, I'm going to be removing these from the playlist because this is not what I want it to be. And then you can go to the top or bottom, just a bunch of other options here. Okay, so those are cool. Those are some cool options that you have for editing your playlist. Now I want to get into why should you start a podcast on YouTube. And there are a bunch of different reasons just in general why you should start a podcast. As I mentioned, it's already going to be monetized. All your content can be in one place. You don't have to worry about learning about Spotify, Apple, anything like that. You don't have to worry about how to get monetized. You don't have to build an audience on those platforms or build followers, especially if your playlist is or your podcast is going to be similar to the content that you're already creating on YouTube. You already have an audience on there, so you can just do it directly on YouTube. And if you're not monetized, long form videos might help you reach your monetization hours as well. Bunch of different reasons why you should start a podcast on YouTube. But according to YouTube, you're going to get extra features like podcast badges, official search cards, and the opportunity to be featured on YouTube podcasts. And apparently they'll also be available in the YouTube Music app, which is relatively cool. As far as what do these features mean, what does it mean to have podcast badges? I don't personally know. I don't know if that's something that they're just telling us about and then we'll learn more information about later on, or if that information is already out there and I've just never heard of it. I'm not sure, but that is what YouTube is saying you will get if you start a podcast on YouTube. So hopefully we'll learn more about that in the future. And according to YouTube and that video that I showed you on this screen here, YouTube also recommended a few best practices that you should do for your podcast as well. So let's go over those. They recommend that you have a public playlist with all of your full-length podcast episodes in them. Even if your podcast has different seasons, you want to keep them all in one playlist. And the playlist name should be the same name as your podcast, and you don't need to add anything extra to it. You don't need to add podcast at the end of it unless podcast is in your title name. So keep your podcast name and your playlist name the exact same. And the last thing that they recommend is to not mix in any other clips or other videos into your podcast playlist. Only keep podcast videos in your podcast playlist. So for example, if you have two different podcasts, you don't want to be mixing videos, or if you're taking shorts from your podcast, you don't want to be mixing in any other clips or funny moments or whatever into your podcast playlist. Keep those on a separate playlist if you really want to do that and do like a shorts YouTube clips or whatever, or a best moments playlist. Do that on a totally different playlist. For specifically your podcast playlist, only keep full-length podcast episodes on there in the order that they should be consumed, in the way that they should be consumed, so that people can interact and find with your content a lot better. And that's how they say that you are going to get the best reach with this new podcast option. And I think this is such a fantastic feature that they're adding. I'm so glad that YouTube is listening to creators, and I don't really know if this is something that they have announced. It's something that I have just seen, and they're kind of announcing it, but I haven't seen a lot of people really talking about it yet, so I wanted to get a video out as quick as possible to you guys to talk about it, because this is such a fantastic feature, especially for someone who's been thinking about launching a podcast and didn't exactly know how to do that. If you're thinking about launching a podcast and you're doing YouTube, well, now you know how to launch a podcast because you can do it straight from YouTube. You can get monetized right away, or you can help yourself potentially get monetized quicker. Amazing feature. So excited about it. If you're excited about it, let me know in the comments down below what you think. And if you want to check out my first podcast episode, check it out right here. Make sure to like this video if you like, and subscribe to my channel down below for more videos just like this. And I'll see you next time. Bye.